I'm Johanna Dale. I'm a research fellow in medieval history at University College London. Today I'm going to tell you about an intriguing object, which is a head reliquary of St Oswald, which is kept in the cathedral treasury at Hildesheim, which is in Lower Saxony, just south of Hanover in Germany. Relics means leftovers. They're little leftover bits of saints, which are kept in these special caskets, these reliquaries, because they are a link between people on earth and the saints in heaven. Relics themselves are described always as being as precious as gold and gems, and often they're not particularly visually impressive things to look at. So actually the function of a reliquary is to show that these relics are as precious as gold, silver and gems. Reliquaries tend to be made with a wooden core. So in the middle of that octagonal building shape is a wooden core with a hollow space, which is where the head, where the skull is kept. And then on top of this wooden core, it's decorated with gold, silver, and all the gems that you can see. And especially the crown on the top has a lot of gems on it. And again, this is to make manifest how important the relics are, because when you see them, they don't look particularly special. So it's speaking for the relics, essentially. Oswald was a king of Northumbria in the 7th century. He converted to Christianity, and he's a very important figure in Northumbrian history because he introduces or reintroduces Christianity into Northumbria. He's famous for founding, along with his bishop Aidan, the monastery at Lindisfarne. He dies in battle in 642. He's killed fighting against an army of non-Christians led by Penda of Mercia. And he's very quickly revered as a saint locally. Penda was a rather brutal opponent, and after he's defeated Oswald on the battlefield, he hacks off his head and his arms, and he places them on a stake on the battlefield, where apparently they stay for almost a year. Now, because Oswald's body has been dismembered like this, it's easy for it to spread around. And Bede tells us that his head is taken to Lindisfarne and buried there, and his arm is taken to Bamborough, which is another seat of Northumbrian royal power. And the fact that his body starts to spread around by this, later the rest of his body is taken to Bardney in Lincolnshire, really helps his cult spread across England. This particular reliquary is interesting because it's unique in its shape. Reliquaries are quite common. Lots of churches and individuals as well kept relics in the Middle Ages and would make special caskets to keep them in. This one has a very unusual shape. The way it's a domed octagonal building shape with that little head on top, that's quite unique. And the other thing that's particularly intriguing about it is this is an object that was made, we're not quite sure where, but in the late 12th century, and we know it was at Hildesheim from at least 1206 because it's mentioned in the report of an attempted burglary, which shows us how important these objects were, that people tried to steal them. So it's in Hildesheim in Lower Saxony, but it claims to contain the head of St Oswald. So why on earth is an English king who died in battle in 642 important to people in 12th century Germany? It's really during the High Middle Ages that he becomes what we might describe as a popular saint in German-speaking lands. And this development is really driven by connections between England and Germany, and particularly some relatively or very high status marriage alliances. The first of these is between Edith, who is the sister of Athelstan of England, the daughter of Edward the Elder of Wessex, and she marries Otto, who goes on to be Otto I of Germany. And actually in a German chronicle, she's described as being of the line of King Oswald. So there's obviously some resonance to Oswald there. In the 11th century, there's a marriage which is even more important in driving popularity of Oswald in Germany. And that's between Judith, who's a daughter of the Count of Flanders. First, she marries Tostig of Northumbria, who's famous for meeting his end in 1066 at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So she has a link to Northumbria and she's very interested in Northumbrian saints. We know that. She likes Cuthbert, who's an important northern saint, as well as Oswald. In 1071, she marries into the Welf dynasty. She marries Welf IV of Bavaria. He has founded a monastery in southern Germany, just north of Lake Constance, called Weingarten. And we know that Judith gives lavish gifts to Weingarten, which include relics of St. Oswald. And Weingarten becomes a very important cult site for St. Oswald in Germany. And finally, in the 12th century, and this provides the context really for this Oswald reliquary from Hildesheim, the daughter of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, who's called Matilda. Matilda marries the famous and mighty German prince, Henry the Lion. They get married in 1068 in Minden Cathedral, and although we can't be certain about the patrons of this particular object, they are often suggested as the likely patrons. The main focus of the reliquary is Oswald. The little head on top of it is supposed to represent his head. However, he's not the only saint represented on this reliquary, and this is important because, as I said, it's not just people aren't just attached to one saint. There's a whole range of saints out there, and they can make varying claims through connecting with them. And again, why this object's been linked with Matilda and Henry the Lion is that the other saints represented on the reliquary are almost all English saints as well. We've got, alongside Oswald, we've got Edward the Confessor, we've got Alfred the Great of Wessex, we've got Canute of Denmark, we've got Ethelwald of Northumbria, we've got Ethelbert of Kent, we've got Edmund of East Anglia, and we've also got Sigismund of Burgundy. Now, aside from Sigismund, those are all very important saints for the English royal family, and we find them, they're very popular with the kings, they're important saints in England. Sigismund of Burgundy is the outsider amongst that group, but he was a very important saint for the Welfs. The Welfs also, one of their great treasures was an arm of Sigismund in a magnificent reliquary too. So you can see that in the decoration of this reliquary, it's fusing that English and Welfish interests. The main way we know about the historical Oswald is through the work of somebody called the Venerable Bede, who was a churchman in the north of England, who wrote a history of the English people, the ecclesiastical history of the English people, and his topic is essentially the Christianization of England, which as a proud man from the north, he sees as beginning in Northumbria. And Oswald is a great hero in this because he Christianizes Northumbria. He founds Lindisfarne, which is one of the most important sites of early Christianity in England. The reliquary purports to contain the head of St. Oswald. The head was cut off on the battlefield. We know it was taken to Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne was sacked by Vikings, and the community at Lindisfarne moved to Durham, where they founded the cathedral, which still stands today. And it's assumed that Oswald's head was taken to Durham. Indeed, it was said to have been buried there in the tomb of St. Cuthbert, who's another great northern saint. And in the late 19th century, Cuthbert's tomb was actually kind of opened up, and there was a skull found in there. So if there is a surviving skull of St. Oswald, it's probably at Durham. However, Hildesheim isn't the only other place that claims to have or have had some of Oswald's head. Utrecht in the Netherlands, Zug and Schaffhausen in Switzerland, and also Echternach in Luxembourg mentions in a reliquary list having the head of St. Oswald. Obviously, he didn't have all these heads. They couldn't all fit together to be one skull. Did people in Hildesheim believe it was the actual head of St. Oswald? In some ways, the important thing is that it's a link between heaven and earth. And so I think the authenticity of the object, I think we can, in the modern day, get a bit too kind of hung up on. I don't think that was necessarily the most important issue. Oswald continues after the 12th century to be an important saint for the Welf dynasty. Weingarten, one of the most important monasteries just north of Lake Constance, in 1217 is actually rededicated, and Oswald becomes one of the dedicatees of the church along with St Martin. And there's an absolutely splendid manuscript that's produced in Weingarten about this time, which has Oswald on this amazing gold and jewelled cover. And within the manuscript, he features prominently on the liturgical calendar, and also for his feast day, there's a wonderful double-page miniature showing a scene from the Venerable Bede at the Easter feast. It's a very famous moment in Oswald's life. But slowly Oswald's cult seems to spread beyond these elite circles. He starts off being this elite link to England that the Welfs are very proud of, but the cult starts to become more popular. There are something like a dozen villages in the German-speaking Alps named St. Oswald, named after a 7th century Northumbrian king, which is a very unusual link to have. And as Oswald's cult spreads outside of these elite centres, outside of the traditional church commemoration, some very unusual stories about him develop. We don't know exactly when these stories develop. This is one of the great questions in German medieval literary scholarship. But at some point, Oswald stops being this Christianizing Northumbrian king. The link to England isn't relevant to people living in the Austrian Alps. They're not trying to make out they've got an important link to the English royal court, and they reshape Oswald for themselves. And a story develops in which Oswald wants a wife, and a pilgrim comes to his court and suggests he goes overseas to find a wife. And at this point, a raven that has apparently lived at his court for 12 years can suddenly speak all languages and get sent off as a messenger to try and woo a bride for King Oswald. So we're a very long way from the 7th century historical king of Northumbria. And this raven actually just steals the show. Oswald, is kind of in the shadows. The raven has adventures with mermaids, gets kidnapped and taken to the bottom of the sea. So the way the story of Oswald has changed from the 7th century northern England to late medieval German-speaking lands in southern Germany, Austria, via these high-status marriage alliances in the Middle Ages, I think tells a very unusual story of cultural change and exchange right across the Middle Ages.